Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Online Warriors podcast. My name is Illeagle 86. Well, it's not my real name, but that's my name. And today I told someone at work that I do this show, which is always it's a very brave moment for me. Did any of your coworkers know that you do a show? I think we've talked about this, but
yeah.
The ones that are friends. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I felt like for a while now, I felt like me and this guy have a good enough working relationship where he can know about this.
Do you know he's going to listen to this now and be like, "Wow, we're friends."
What a rube! That's what he's going to say.
I would never. He might not. I'm not holding him to anything. Illegal 86, by the way, it's not spelled. I'm not just like a criminal. I feel like I was thinking about this on my ride home from work.
You're
today.
a sick bird.
I should make sure that people know I'm a sick bird. That's the joke. It's a pun. I'm sure everyone's rolling in the aisles right now. I'm Illeagle 86. I'm joined by Nerdbomber and Techtic, who you've already heard from. And presumably, if you're like above like Oklahoma or something, how far down did the Aurora Borealis, which by the way, as you can tell, I can barely say it. How far down did it get?
I think they said they could see it in Florida. Like there were photos I saw out of like Tampa Bay.
And the trick of it, which I believe Nerdbomber, you told me this, or my sister-in-law did, but I read about it later in the news. And it's too late now. This isn't useful information for people, but like if it happens again, and you look up at the sky and you're like, I can't see anything, take a picture with your phone, because it like I would look up at, it was wild. I look up at the sky and I couldn't see a thing. Take a picture of my phone. It was like I was on another planet, which was a very weird feeling. But you're saying so in our neck of the woods, peak time was like after midnight, which that is not a legal time.
No,
peak
I would
legal
say
time is
on the East Coast. Peak
I was
time,
out at 10 o'clock.
There was a big flux at like 10:05. I was watching.
I was out there.
I don't totally understand what they mean, but I was following like KP levels and the G levels of the solar storms, and then they were like,
it was a G.
It was like G5,
Yeah,
KP9. It was crazy.
So did you ever see it with your naked? Because I was out at like 10 p.m. our time. And I couldn't really see. I could faintly see it with my naked eye, just enough to know there was something, but it basically just looked like clouds.
We
like,
walked outside, and then, like it was like perfect timing because all of a sudden, like a redness covered the whole sky, and then we started seeing swirly, twirly green streaks, and we were actually able to see it like shimmer along the waves. It was like I literally felt like I was in a dream. It was the coolest experience I've ever had in my life.
It was magical. I'm not even lying. What's crazy to me is like, it was a bucket list thing for me to see the Aurora Borealis. You'll all laugh at me, but when I was a kid, when Brother Bear came out, I thought that was just like the coolest thing. And I also thought it was like overhyped. Like I thought it wasn't real, but then I discovered that like you kind of know it's a real thing, but like I didn't realize it like took over the whole sky. I guess I didn't really have a good sense of what it was as a kid. And then I discovered that it is like this event that happens. It's not like a once every, 1,000-year thing. Like it happens regularly. And so I always wanted to like go to Iceland or the Arctic Circle so I could see this stuff, and it came to me, which is cool. Obviously not to the level that you would see
not the
up
same
there, but like still.
Like I feel like the tundra and the flat whiteness of the land probably really emphasizes, the Aurora Borealis-ness of the sky when you're like up in the Arctic Circle. So that's where I would want to be to see it. But it was very cool. Like it was the thing about it that I thought was nice, and some people have complained about this. But others have been like, it's nice, is like, we were all kind of gearing up for the solar eclipse for like weeks, and we're like, this thing is happening, prepare yourself, get your glasses, make your plans, yada, yada, yada. The Aurora Borealis, and maybe my head's in the sand, but like, I did not hear that there was a possibility of it until like the day before, because I think we didn't know, and then we were suddenly like, oh, dang, there was a big coronal ejection, and like, this is coming, and like, not for nothing, like, the other side of that is like, like I think NOAA like released a warning, which they don't ever do. It was like, turn off your really expensive computers because like I guess there was a chance that it could like fry some stuff. I don't think that happened. I didn't hear about any widespread issues with that, but pretty lights in the sky is always a nice byproduct. And it was a G5 electromagnetic storm or geomagnetic storm. I don't remember which it is, but that's over, and now we're back to just a boring sky that's nothing. So that ought to pick you up here on this Wednesday in mid-May. It's Wednesday. I assume you're listening on the first day and the first possible minute that this comes out. And that's good because we're hitting you with a bunch of current events today. We got to talk about Thelma. And that's not just a lady that I know. That is a trailer for a movie that I'm very excited to discuss. We're going to be talking a little bit about Lord of the Rings, which anyone who listens to this show knows that I'm a ring man. I'm a Lord of the Rings man, and there's some news that we're going to get into there. And then, of course, we need to talk about Xbox. Microsoft, I should say, kind of doing Microsoft things. Is that a fair way to phrase this at this point? It sounds like they're getting a reputation for this sort of thing. We'll lead with that topic because it's the most depressing, and I want to get it out of the way. So, essentially, last week, Microsoft decided to shut down several game studios. This is May 7th that this happened, including Arkane Austin and Tango Gameworks. Arkane Austin most recently worked on Redfall. Tango Gameworks on Hi-Fi Rush. Now, there's a lot of testimonials to be had here, and X and Twitter, whichever you want to call it, was really bouncing with a lot of opinions on this, most of them negative towards Microsoft, obviously. I was mostly confused when reading this, not so much because of Redfall, because I heard Redfall was kind of a dud. I didn't play it myself, but I heard it was kind of a dud. But Hi-Fi Rush was like kind of a hit from what I remember, and like people were excited about it, and it did well. And then Microsoft was like, well, whatever, and they just closed the studio.
Well, what's very interesting is that, shortly after they closed these studios, their leadership had an all hands meeting that got leaked, and they basically said we need to focus on smaller games that go for awards and stuff like that. And Hi-Fi Rush, it won a bunch of awards.
It's kind of a picture
exactly
perfect
what
example
it is.
of that.
Yeah. So that's very confusing to me. And I understand, I don't want to necessarily completely come at Microsoft alone, because I know Sony also shut down some studios, and I think this is pretty much across the industry. Studios are getting shut down. I don't think the game companies don't have the vision to see you need to hang on to talent, because the people who are making these games, even if a game flops, you're looking at your next quarter earnings, so you want to lay people off, but then you don't have anything in the hopper for 2-3 years from now, and games take a while to make, and you need people who have some experience to make them. And I don't understand necessarily what is happening in the games industry, or really any industry if you think about it at large. But
it feels like it's a quick turn pump and dump.
Arkane, I think it's Arkane Leon. I don't know how to pronounce it, I guess. But that studio they're still working on Blade. They weren't touched by this. I do want to shout out one testimonial specifically, kind of speaking to what you were saying, Nerdbomber. Thomas Mahler wrote, to everyone who's been pestering me for years about why we didn't allow Moon Studios to get acquired by a big publisher, that's why. This is in light of the news. Moon Studios did Ori and the Blind Forest, for some context. Another guy on Twitter, Adam Boyes, co-CEO of Iron Galaxy Studios, former PlayStation executive. He didn't write anything, but he just posted basically a screenshot of him Googling what was Microsoft's profit in 2024. The numbers are obscene. I think, it's pretty transparent, and I think anyone who's part of the world in 2024 could easily guess that this is a very soulless business move that didn't really need to happen. But I think the real issue here, and I think what a lot of people on Twitter are talking about, is games very often are not appreciated, in particular in the business world, for what they are, I guess. I think it's weird to just continually say games are an art form, because I think we're all readily prepared to say that they are, and there's countless evidence and games that we've played that just clearly make that true. But I think in boardrooms it's so much easier to lose that. When you're talking about a video game, it's so much less evident than when you're talking about a movie or a show, that it's art. So not all art is going to be the most profitable thing in the world. Now again, in this case, I don't know, Hi-Fi Rush felt like it was profitable and successful, and I don't understand the reasoning there. But I think when you look at this as a more endemic problem that's not just focused on this particular instance, it's these things happen because it's not, the industry isn't taking care of its artists. That's the predominant issue, and how you solve that is very confusing, and I don't have a good answer for it.
The implications for the state of video games as a whole is kind of scary to me. We've gotten to a point where, like you said, we're not investing in the art. We're not allowing developers to take risks, because if a game is risky and a completely new, out of left field idea and it doesn't perform, they're going to be afraid of getting shut down. I mean, even if you do create a game that performs very well, you're obviously not safe. And I think the industry now is just focused on these live service games that are they live in perpetuity. and they rely on people to buy game passes, like battle passes, and all these different like add-ons and DLCs, and basically relying on the whales where you can make one game and just milk it dry. And you look at things like Fortnite or Call of Duty, which Microsoft just bought Activision, so now Call of Duty is in their wheelhouse. And like, are we only ever going to get now these big live service, ever-long multiplayer games where they can just kind of like milk the whales who keep investing over and over? Like, is this kind of the death outside of the indie sphere of creative AAA games by, you know, mega publishers? Because clearly that's not what investors seem to want. They don't seem to care about that. If it doesn't make a lot of money, they don't seem to care. They don't want it.
I don't think it's the death of AAA titles, but I think these...
Like the single player experiences, though.
I think these big publishers are the Grim Reapers of them.
Well, I mean, even you look at I think it's WB Games, or maybe it was EA, where Hogwarts Legacy, regardless of how you feel about Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, etc., was a commercial and critical success, right? Like, it outperformed everyone's expectations financially. And yet, that publisher is still saying, we would like to pivot to a focus on live service games, even in the wake of games like the Suicide Squad game completely bombing. And they don't seem to care. They want like that everlasting money grab, and they don't necessarily seem to care about that single player artistic experience, which is just wild to me because that's not where games originated. And like, I understand the need for those games, but like, that shouldn't be all we're getting from the AAA space.
Well, and even, you know, I agree that the AAA space is struggling as a result of the live service thing. But like, what I was really thinking was that, and Nerdbomber, I think you've talked about this in the past, like, it feels like there are two spheres right now when there used to be three. One sphere is like AAA titles, known IPs, big dollar things. The other sphere is like indie passion projects that like there's a 2-person studio that self-funded it to make it, and it debuts on the Steam store for like $2 or just Nintendo eShop for $2. There used to be, at least based on my recollection, I know you've talked about it, there used to be like what I would call a AA space of like this game. There was a fairly independent studio that maybe they got financial backing from someone, or maybe they just, you know, happened to be big enough that they were bigger than a 2-person studio, but they were like a team of 20 guys or something, and they made this game that was really great. And they aren't this big EA title; they're just a cool, you know, mid-range game. And like, the thing about that, I would think that would, it's surprising to me from an economic perspective that would die, because I would think that a smaller studio making a game that you could justify selling for $60 or $70, I would think that would be good, just in terms of you can make a full game and charge a price for it that matches the AAA titles without using AAA resources. Well, clearly it's not that simple because the studios aren't doing it anymore. But like, I want to understand why that kind of sphere, that third sphere, is dwindled down to a point. Like, it's barely there anymore.
My theory, and I don't know this for certain, and sorry to cut you off, Techtic, but my theory is that right now, the graphical expectations and the hardware, like if you just look at the development cycle of games, you go back to the PS3, PS4, and like Naughty Dog alone, they were pumping out 3 or 4 games per console cycle. And I think we've gotten to a point where development cycles are so long because the architecture and the expectations for these games are so drastically higher than they used to be. Like, Naughty Dog has not released a game on the PS5 yet this generation. They haven't.
Right.
And I think that trickles down. Like, if a big team can't make a game within 4 to 5 years on this new system hardware, what hope does a AA team have of doing something in between that? Because I'm not saying that indie games aren't graphically impressive or processing power like intensive.
Well, but they're not known for that, right? That's not what they're trying to do.
And I think trying to meet the in-between, I think you get into a lot of higher effort and cost that teams just can't do and be profitable. I mean, AAA teams can't be profitable doing it. AA teams definitely can't be. There's no hope there.
I do wonder if in these board meetings where they discuss these layoffs and the employee plans of how many, you know, personnel are going to be dedicated to each game, I do wonder if all of these executives are throwing around AI like it's this super mature thing that they can just replace people with. I wouldn't
Almost
be
certainly.
surprised if that level of out of touchness on what's involved in the game development is what's driving a lot of this.
Well, I mean, the other thing too, like AI is one thing, but also I think that these executives are looking at the giant spike that happened during the COVID years when everybody was stuck at home and everybody was looking for ways to fill their days when they had nothing else to do. And if you look, like there was even, I believe it's Sarah Bond, who's one of the executives at Xbox, was doing an interview or a panel, and she was talking about, like they had asked about, you know, the closure of these studios. And then it was actually hilarious because they kind of panned back, and up above them, they had a screen about Microsoft's gaming profits year over year. And there was a giant spike during the COVID years. But of course, like people are out and about, they're no longer stuck at home. And while that bar is still very high and much higher than it was pre-COVID, it's starting to come down a little bit because obviously people are not just stuck in their house playing video games anymore. And I think there's also this knee-jerk reaction to react to that slow downturn off a completely unexpected, record-breaking turn of events and like crazy profit that is not the fault of the developers. And now they're just being held to these crazy high financial expectations that are insane and should realistically never be a thing.
Let's introspect here for a little bit. Like, it's been mentioned in this conversation that like part of the reason that AA space has died and the reason that smaller studios struggle is that expectations for games are now so high, right? Graphically, whatever, what the experience is, the expectations are so high. Does that make us the problem? Like I think that, you know, and in particular with indies, like I enjoy indies that I don't think require a AAA team slaving away. And like in the same vein, I do think I would enjoy a game that like, yeah, it might not be the most graphically polished, but it's fun, right? Like I think there are recent examples of that. Like, why do those just get drowned out by the noise of, I think in particular, the like games as a service thing, like you were saying, Nerdbomber, like that seems to be flooding the industry, I guess, because, you know, the big dogs see this as like a potentially more constant revenue stream than just selling one game and just getting the $70 for it. But like, I don't know how we solve this. I want to know if we're the problem as consumers.
I don't think we're the
we
problem.
Need to shift our expectations.
And you only have to look at the crazy success. Hades 2 just launched into early access. It's not even a fully complete game yet. Like, it's very complete, but it's not a fully complete game yet. They've already said there's elements of the story missing. And if you look at how many people have played that game, there's clearly demand for the indie space and the smaller game. And I'm not saying that it's a small game by any means, but like, it's not a AAA flashy 3D graphics style game. It isn't. But I think Xbox and even PlayStation, like they've created now this element where even those games, if they try to release the smaller game, it's no longer profitable because Xbox kicked off Game Pass. And now if you have a low price game subscription for, I mean, most people, I have not paid for Game Pass since it was introduced because they converted all of my Xbox Live Gold and it finally expires in 2026, but I have not paid a dime towards Xbox Game Pass. And all of the indies and like Hi-Fi Rush, I played for free. And so I think there's still demand for indie games, but people aren't buying them. They're waiting for them to hit Game Pass. And likewise, PlayStation has followed suit with their own streaming / on-demand game service. So people, when they, you know, mega studios owned by Microsoft and Sony, when they want to do something smaller and creative, like even Pentiment, that launched on Game Pass, they're not getting money for that outside the game subscription. So like, it's kind of like an Ouroboros where they're eating their own tail a little bit because the only way they can really make profit now because of the Game Pass and streaming services is if they can get people to bite on like DLC and additional in-game content that's not included. I don't think though that indie demand is the problem because people love indie games. You mentioned Microsoft and Sony in there. Like, I think this is again why Nintendo is just so in its own world with this kind of stuff. I mean, they have a very strong indie market, but they also like, I think one of Nintendo's greatest successes is that even their AAA titles and their coveted IPs, so often do they feel like that AA quality of like, it's not, you don't show up to play a Mario game on the Switch because you want to see photorealistic graphics. You just don't. Like it has this sort of other charm that I think in particular people who own a Switch and own another console, like they go to the Switch to like take a break and play Luigi's Mansion after playing like Call of Duty
and grinding on it for a while. Like, Nintendo is so smart in a lot of ways, and I think they've carved out their own space, and it's a very charming space. And, you know, for all I know, there's news like this coming out of Nintendo too, where they're like cutting smaller studios, but like you don't hear about it as much. At least I don't think I do. And
I mean, also
there
you
may
hear
well
about
be a
their
reason for
CEOs
that.
taking the price cut instead, but hey.
That's also true. And, you know, it could be a function of ownership. I really have no idea. But you hear about them in these sorts of conversations a lot less. And I think that also maybe has to do with expectations. Like, when the next Animal Crossing comes out, no one's going to people have expectations for it that I think can be reasonably met. Like, it just, you know, it goes back to the graphical quality and what these consoles have deemed themselves to be, I guess.
I think we forgot.
It's all very interesting.
That, like, you can have a game that's not super graphically intense, and if the gameplay isn't there, nobody wants to play it. But if you have fun gameplay, it can kind of trump the graphical experience. And I feel like that's gotten lost somewhere along the line.
And, like, you know, I've complained about triangles before. I'm sure I'll do it again. Like, it is a double-edged sword. Knowing what these consoles are now capable of, I do want to see that sometimes. But there are other times when I just don't care as much. And yeah, it's a knife's edge for these smaller devs that are owned by Microsoft and Sony to walk. And like, that's kind of why I asked the question before of like, is this a function of us? And if it is, how do we shift our paradigm in terms of what we want to get out of a game? Because that may be what it takes. One thing's for sure, Microsoft's going to do whatever Microsoft can do to make the most money. Like, us complaining about this on this podcast and other people complaining about it on Twitter really isn't going to do much to move the needle. What moves the needle, as ever, is money. So it's going to be when people stop paying for these soullessly churned out big titles that we get more games in that AA space again. I don't know that that's ever going to happen, which is sad. And that's why I wanted to talk about this topic first, because it's sad. Pour one out for these studios. I guess just, I don't know. If you're a gamer, don't think so much about triangles. And support indie titles. And support, support AAA titles of a certain ilk as well. Just don't support games as a service. I don't know, that's painting with a broad brush. But I do think it's part of this downward spiral, as you indicated, Nerdbomber. Let's shift things here. Let's talk about something more fun. Let's talk about Thelma. Now, I will say, discussing film, tweeted, first trailer for Thelma, a grandma action revenge thriller, in theaters June 21st. When I heard a grandma action revenge thriller, I pictured Taken with a Grandma. I should have probably realized that wasn't a super reasonable expectation. I think that this trailer and this movie is much more... It stands to be much more heartfelt. I think the grandma action revenge thriller is a very grabby thing to say, so I don't want to like lead with that and say that that's what it is. I think this looks great, but I don't think it's that. I think it's an interesting commentary on the actual epidemic of like elderly people being taken in by scams constantly, which like is actually horrifying. And like, I don't want to dwell on that too much. This movie is about this grandma, quote unquote, taking revenge on people who basically fleeced her out of money. I think $10,000 if I remember the trailer correctly. And it looks very cute. I would definitely see this. Yeah, I don't know that I would see it in theaters, but I would definitely see it. And it's definitely a kind of tying into the last topic and you know, in the vein that we've talked about a lot of movies like this. Like this is a mid-budget movie, if not a low-budget movie, that I think deserves some attention. This
feels like something that I would see at the drive-in. And it might not be like the first movie of the night, but this would be like the follow-up movie, and I would probably end up liking this more than whatever I went to see in the first place.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of, to use a fantasy football term, a lot of upside. There's a lot of upside to this movie. I think you could watch this movie on, like, I could watch this movie on HBO Max and just like on a whim and be delighted and potentially moved. Like, I do think this movie is going to have a surprising amount of deep dramatic content and things to say about getting old, which I don't know if you guys know this. We're all getting older.
We are.
I feel it every day. It's brutal. A guy, I was at work today, not to bring up work again, but a guy said, how's it going? He said, 1 day closer to retirement. And in my head, I thought,
1 day closer to death.
I might not ever retire, so I might just be 1 day closer to death. And, you know, I'm looking forward to retiring. If ever that happens, I think it's going to be great.
Yeah.
hopefully I'll age gracefully. But yeah, this movie looks great. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it other than that it's going to be in theaters on June 21st.
I do have to call out June Squibb, though. Like, first of all, I think she's like 94 years old. And
I'm not aware of her. What should I know her for besides this?
She's done a lot of like little roles in a lot of things. I'm sure maybe when she was younger, she had bigger roles, but I only really know her as like an older person. So she was in Good Girls. I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but it had like Retta and the person. There's a lot of people in Good Girls. We talked about it. We watched it a while back, but she was like the grandmother in that. She had a role in Palm Springs, like a cameo type role. She had a cameo type role in Hubie Halloween.
I saw that movie.
Palmer, like she's had a lot of like, now that she's older, like roles as like the grandma who cracks a few jokes and is hilarious. And she really does have really good comedic timing. And the fact that, you know, I'm not going to say this is like an action movie, but she's definitely like scooting around both literally and figuratively in this movie trailer. And the fact that she's like 94 and still getting it, like good for you, June Squibb. Good for you.
Additional shout out, Richard Roundtree, who I believe was the original, like wasn't he Shaft in the original Shaft show? I think that's what he's known for. And also Clark Gregg, who most people will know as Agent Phil Coulson, and Parker Posey, who most people will know from, I don't know, various things that she's been in. She's probably the most famous person in this movie. Yeah, I would see the crap out of this. I don't, I guess, like I said before, and like not to be a buzzkill, I don't know that I would go to a theater to see this necessarily, because I went to the theater this weekend and tickets were like $13. We'll get to that later in my What Are You Up To? And that's like, I know it's been going on for a while, but it has me feeling a little anti-theater right now. But yeah, as I said, Thelma comes out June 21st. Also, it's already on Rotten Tomatoes because it was at Sundance, I assume. It's got a 98%. Crisp 98% on 57 reviews. That is the critic score, mind you. There is no audience score yet, presumably because no one who wasn't at Sundance has seen it yet. And also, it's 97 minutes long, which is a good length for a movie. Down with 2.5-hour movies as like a norm, because that's definitely the trend right now. So again, June 21st, Thelma comes out. We're going to take a short break now before coming back to discuss The Lord of the Rings. But before we do that, I would be remiss if I did not shout out our fantastic Patreon producer, Mr. Stephen Keller, who joined us on the show just last week. He won the quiz. He upset the balance of power, and he got the opportunity to do so as a result of his producer level subscribership. That is the night level on our Patreon. So as a night level subscriber, he gets his producer shout out every episode. He gets the occasional guest spot on the show, which he had last week. He gets input into our weekly game segment at the end of every episode. And he, of course, gets access to the monthly secret segment and the monthly vlog. There's also a Squire level of support, which is just one below that. You know, the hierarchy in medieval times, Knight, Squire, Page. The Squire gets access to the monthly secret segment and vlog, and the Page gets access to the monthly secret segment. So check out the levels. Head over to patreon.com/Online Warriors Podcast. Say hi to us. Say hi to Steven. Consider helping us keep this thing going. And, yeah, consider being a Squire, Page, Knight, whatever you feel comfortable being. If you're a Knight, you might get a shout out on the show. So thanks again to Steven, and we'll be right back to talk about The Lord of the Rings.
I'm Ryan Fonzie.
This is Cameron Hagee.
My name is Tony Giggles.
And we're three dudes who love The Legend of Zelda and love talking about The Legend of Zelda.
And if you are a Zelda fan as much as we are, then come on down and listen to your heart's content.
We have a podcast that we'd like to share with you. It's called A for No, B for Yes. We cover the Legend of Zelda series, different games chapter by chapter, and we have all kinds of theories about what we see and what we've experienced in the game.
Do you go through Wikipedia and look up stuff based on the things you see in the game to create theories to how it could link to other things in the world that we actually live in, and not the Zelda one that was the one that was created by the people that are in the world that we actually live in right now? Because if you don't, then you should watch this, because we do.
Did you guys get all that? If not, oh, you didn't. Okay. So we are A for No, B for... All right, I'll stop.
Okay, we are back to talk about The Lord of the Rings. The news we got late last week, I believe. Warner Brothers Discovery basically said, hey, we have a Gollum movie in development. there's been a lot of talk about Lord of the Rings getting a bunch more movies because it's a very valuable IP. We, of course, had the show fairly recently. The movies kind of have stood the test of time as being amazing. And now they're making a movie called Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum. That is a working title directed by and starring Andy Serkis, which I never understand how someone can direct and be in almost all of the scenes, but that's neither here nor there. There's really no details about the story here, but for those that do not know, Lord of the Rings is a pretty old IP, so I'm not really giving anything away here. Gollum dies at the end of The Return of the King. He gets boiled in lava. You can't really come back from that. So presumably this would be either a prequel or like a mid-quel, which is not a word.
It has to be a mid-quel. It has to be.
Well, the predominant theory is that in the Fellowship of the Ring, there is a fairly long gap of time that, admittedly, when you're watching the movie, it's not super clear, but in the book, it's clear that there's actually a period of, I believe, years of time during which...
Because they take a lot of time to establish, like, him getting the ring and him killing his friend and, like, all of that. And so...
Well, there's not even that. I'm talking about after that.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It has to be a midquel because, like, they took the time to establish Gollum as a character. Anything before that whole event is kind of who gives a shit. But it's really
it's not interesting.
It is that in between that is where it's interesting. So I don't see it being any other time period.
Well, I would go further than that, and I would say that the in between also not very interesting. Like the predominant theory is that in between Bilbo's birthday party and when Frodo leaves Hobbiton to take the ring to Rivendell, there's a stretch there where Gandalf sends Aragorn to find Gollum, and he doesn't. Spoiler alert again, he doesn't find Gollum. Gollum gets taken to Mordor and tortured, and that's how they find out where to find Frodo, and that's why the Black Riders are chasing him. I don't know that there's a whole lot of a story there.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I agree with you. I'm just saying, of all of the time periods, that's the only thing that's the most interesting, and even that, like, I agree. What's there? This is a silly idea. They need to stop.
I think there's a cardinal rule to potentially be followed here. I mean, when you look at the 3 books, The Lord of the Rings, not even talking about the Silmarillion or the Hobbit or any of those. When you look at those 3 books, if you've read them, they are tomes. They're great books, but they are super long. They're jam-packed with material. Every so often, J.R.R. Tolkien will be like, hey, what if I wrote a song that went on for 4 pages? And it's about some elf that died 20 billion years ago. Like, there's a lot of interludes like that. There's side characters that show up and then never show up again. There's a lot of interesting stories. This period that's being focused on here, where Gollum is being hunted by Aragorn, Tolkien doesn't really say a word about it. In fact, it barely comes up. So, like, I think the golden rule to be followed is there's so many other side stories that you could make and create and talk about and write movies for. You know, Tom Bombadil is a huge character in the first book. He does not appear in any of the movies. And I'm not saying you could make a TV show or a movie about Tom Bombadil, but like
Tom Bombadil
my point is
there's so interesting. That you can't just say that.
He wore the ring.
He's crazy powerful too. Like just insanely powerful. Oh my God, Illeagle, you are a genius. That's who they should be focusing on.
Well, you have characters like that, and I'm not sure there's a story there either, but there's probably more of a story there, or there's more story to be had. I mean, even the extended editions of these movies, there are entire subplots that they just had to cut for time. Like, I'm fine with one of those turning into a movie. Like, I don't know that this needs to be a movie. I think this is designed to be an Andy Serkis kind of, I don't want to say passion project, but like it's him being a front man in every sense of the word, making this movie. Worth noting that Peter Jackson is producing, so like his vision will be involved, which I think is critical. Like I just think this is a minefield, right? And I'm sure I said this about the show too, and the show I thought turned out to be decent, if not good. But this is a little different because the show takes place before any of the events of the movies. If this is indeed a mid-quill, if we want to call it that, it's dancing in the minefield of like people seeing Gandalf and being like, that's not Gandalf, or people seeing Aragorn and being like that. I think in particular Aragorn, people seeing Aragorn and saying that's not Aragorn. That's a big problem they're going to have to deal with, especially if Gollum looks the same. So I don't know how they're going to manage that. I don't know what the script is going to look like at all. I'm all for more Lord of the Rings content, but there is better content. And I think there's also better content in universe. Like, I think you could take a character like Faramir, who is kind of a ranger in Ithilien. Like, he is, again, a side character who shows up in a little bit of the third movie and the second movie. And, like, there's so much more you could get out of him as a character, kind of on the front lines between Gondor and Mordor. Like, you can make that an episodic thing and get a whole property out of it. And there's probably stories to be had there. Aragorn and Gollum, I don't know, Aragorn hunting Gollum, like, I don't know how interesting that's going to be. I have a lot of questions about it. That's kind of why I wanted to talk about this. Either way, not due until 2026, and also worth noting, probably going to be better than the game. That's something worth mentioning. I'm not going to ask you guys right now if, like, you're going to go see this, because we don't know anything about it. But I guess I just wanted to talk about this topic because I have questions. You're out. Okay. You're immediately out. I do recommend reading the Lord of the Rings books. If you want to know what I'm talking about and you want to know what all these other great stories are, you'll probably read the first one, and halfway through you'll realize exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that's a good thing.
No, I don't
J.R.
even bother
Tolkien
with
was kind of
that.
a genius.
Just go down the rabbit hole of Tom Bombadil fan theories. It is so much more fascinating. I promise.
At OW Illeagle 86, at OW Techtic, at OW Nerdbomber, and our main show account at Online Warriors 1. What Lord of the Rings content do you want to see? And is it a Gollum movie? I have a feeling it's not, but let me know. Let us know over on the Twitter sphere. That brings us to What Are You Up To Wednesday. This is a part of the show where we talk about what we've been up to. And I know last week Steven went first. I don't know who went second. We're going to start with Nerdbomber today. That's the point of this.
All right, so I told you guys I was reading the Magician's book series. I finished the second book in the series, The Magician King, and I liked the first book, but I was like a little more lukewarm than I thought I would be on it. The second book is way better. I think the first book kind of had the Holden Caulfield effect with the main character, where he was just a little too whiny for me. And the second book, he's not as much of a little pansy-ass bitch.
The Holden Caulfield effect.
I mean...
Yeah, I like how you brought that up like it was an academic term. It's just you not liking Holden Caulfield.
Yes.
That sounds like what it is.
It's like a universal thing. That book, it's a very...
Was that Catcher in the Rye?
Yes, it's a very...
It's Catcher in the Rye. I get your point. I know what the term
Some people love
means.
it, and
like,
some people hate it because he's a very divisive character.
She was reading that. She's like, just bang the prostitute already. Christ.
He was so whiny. I couldn't...
Spoiler alert.
But the first book, the main character, who you're basically, living the book through his perspective, felt a little too whiny, and it was kind of frustrating. In the second book, there's a lot more progress in his character development. There's also a lot more action that just makes any whininess that he does have a little bit more palatable. So I think the second book was way better, in my opinion, and I enjoyed a lot more than the first book. So now I'm on to the third book in the trilogy, which will round everything out. And I've heard the third book is the best one. So I'm excited to see, how much better it might be than the second book. So here we go. The other thing that I want to talk about is... I started playing Brotatoe, which you guys, I think, heard me gush over Vampire Survivors. It's kind of like a roguelike, like horde style game, like a survival style game, where every time you survive a wave, you get to pick like new power-ups and weapons and stuff and build a different character loadout, and then stuff just comes at you from the screen and you have to try to survive. And I don't know why, like, this is not a game that if you asked me 5 or 10 years ago if I would have told you, what are you talking about? This looks so dumb. But it is something like I pop music on and I can get lost in these games for like hours. So yeah, I was playing a lot of that. Brotatoe I thought was pretty good. So like Vampire Survivors, I don't want to say that the boards are infinite, but they are very large boards. So you have a lot more room to move around, whereas Brotatoe, it's a very similar, like the gameplay is almost exactly the same, but you're in a more contained area, and there's a lot of more different characters, loadouts that have different like perks and stuff that you can choose from. And I think it's not, I don't want to say it's more of the same like Vampire Survivors, but in my mind, it's just like a different take on the genre and a refreshing way to pass some time. It's something you pick up for like half an hour and then you can put down, which is great. Very Zen style game.
Vampire Survivor is still on my list of games to try, by the way. It's still on there. Hasn't left yet.
I mean, you can check out Brotatoe too, whichever one is cheaper. It's basically, they're both the same. One just has, they're different art styles, It depends if you're in a silly, goofy mood or if you're in a more gothic mood. But it's generally the same type of game.
Right. The two main moods, silly,
Yes.
goofy, or gothic. Well, very good. Techtic, I'm going to let you continue us down there, assuming you were all wrapped up there, Nerdy B.
Yes, sir.
I beat Hades.
You beat Hades.
I beat it.
That's a fulfilling update.
And then the game was
What are
like,
your-
yo, dog, you got to beat it more times. And I was like, son of a bitch.
Oh, I see. So you tricked me. That was very effective. Because that's what the game is, right? It's just like, hey, keep going.
Yeah, you're supposed to beat him apparently 10 times to get the full story. And like, summer's coming, guys. Like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, but you're on
You're
your
like,
Switch.
let's wrap it up.
You're on your Switch.
Yeah, but like, I beat Hades. Like,
Right. He's
I
been
beat him.
he's been conquered. The main boss.
and then the other thing that I want to talk about is we watched Five Nights at Freddys because apparently this scary movie isn't a scary movie. And so Nerdbomber was down to watch it. And
it had Peter Millar
absolutely
and
was not
Shaggy.
a scary movie.
How scary could it be?
Absolutely was not.
Does that
scary.
beat a mark?
I think the video game is probably significantly scarier than this movie was. This was more like playful mystery is how I would describe it, but definitely not scary.
The video game looks scary. But it's also like Five Nights at Freddy's is a confusing IP because I think it's mostly geared to like children, even though it's scary. So I'm guessing the movie was like, we need to be a fun kid-ish movie.
This was
and it
definitely
sounds like that's what
not-
you're describing.
This was definitely not a kid movie. I wouldn't say there was a ton of gore, but there was gore.
But it wasn't scary gore.
But
It was
like, I would not
there
let
goes that person's life.
an 8-year-old. I
Shucks.
would not let watch this movie.
Maybe a 9-year-old. 10? 10. Double digits.
This is a case though where like the Rotten Tomatoes score I think was in the 30s.
Yeah, that tracks.
Really? I thought that was better. I thought it was like a solid 50 or 60%.
You were just smitten. That's why. Peter Malark.
32% on Rotten Tomatoes. 87%
I thought
audience score. So the audience is what
I thought
crazy
the plot
for it.
was kind of like holy and the little bit of acting was kind of cringe.
But I thought there was, so I expected this to just be like slasher, horror, gore type movie. Like I didn't think it would be like scary, but I thought it would just be a lot of like slasher film. And the fact that they gave it a story that was like semi-compelling, like I was like I wanted to see what was going to happen. I was invested. And that's the mark of a decent movie. I wouldn't call it a good movie, but like a decent movie. Mid, but not like 32%.
I feel like, I'm not going to weigh in.
He hated it, I think. Did you hate
I
it?
thought it was okay. I thought it was like, I think the rating matches the movie. I didn't hate it. It was just okay.
But like 32% to me, I give to something that I hate.
Word. Well, cool. Techtic, does that conclude your update?
It do.
Well, I got 3 things to update on. I'll keep them all brief. I did wind up seeing the next Planet of the Apes movie, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I mean, look, it was really good. At this point, I've said all I need to say about the Apes franchise. Get on board or
Help me.
don't. But
Can't
you're
get her
missing
on
out
board.
if you don't. They're great. They're really good. I think the secret sauce to those movies is that they're one of the only big budget IPs that is willing to take itself seriously and not undercut every serious moment with a joke, like Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and so many different movies do. They're fantastic. I would recommend this one. I would recommend all of them. I started a new book. It's called Tough Guys Don't Dance by Norman Mailer. Norman Mailer, you may know as having written The Naked and the Dead, The Executioner's Song, a bunch of other more famous books. I started reading Tough Guys Don't Dance in part because it takes place in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is a place I've been to a number of times on vacation. And it's always fun to read a book about a place that you've been on vacation. You can be like, I remember that place. I probably should have read it in the summer, but I'm having a really good time. I burned through like 30% of it in 2 days. And also I say percent because I'm reading it on Kindle, and Kindle's rule. My final update is I have started playing Deathloop again, which I started playing a long time ago and then put it down and walked away from it. Back to it now. I am enjoying it so far. I'm starting to analyze why I didn't stick with it the first time. And I don't have an answer yet, but I'll report back. I am enjoying it. I'm hoping to stick through it this time. I'm about as far as I was last time before I quit, and I don't intend to quit this time. For the moment, that's all I'll say about it. Which brings us to Quiz Town. And this week, I hosted the quiz last week, and then Steven won. So I'm going to host again this week and remain the mayor of Quiz Town. Nerdbomber is at 7-4. I am also at 7-4. Techtic is at 4-9. So Techtic, I need you to win this week because I will then just by default take the top spot. Steven also 1-1. And the topic this week, as selected by our Patreon folk, is good old Donkey Kong. You guys know Donkey Kong. He's a monkey. Monkey. And all these questions are numerical, as usual. We'll do Price is Right style. Everyone gets one answer of either the number one or +1 of your opponent. Nerdbomber has the higher record, so she will, of course, go first to give Techtic a slight advantage. Classic first question. When did Donkey Kong first hit arcades? Looking for a year, folks.
1967.
And Techtic.
This was in the 1980s. So 1980.
Excellently played, Techtic. It was in the 1980s, and you went low, which was good. It was July 9th, 1981, where this first showed up in arcades. It does feel older. I understand your answer, Nerdbomber, but
well,
the answer was
Donkey Kong's been around for a while, but arcades were really an 80s thing.
But like,
well, no, don't just
No.
take the point and run, because I'm pretty sure Donkey Kong first showed up in 1981. Like, this is the debut of the character. Don't talk yourself out of a point, man. One of my favorite games on the N64, Donkey Kong 64, actually has a Guinness World Record for the most in-game collectibles. How many in-game collectibles are there in Donkey Kong 64?
It has an award,
A Guinness World Record.
and it hasn't been beat.
It has since been beat based on some internet research I've done, but they haven't awarded a new Guinness World Record. I don't really know how Guinness World Records works. All I know is this has a lot of in-game collectibles. That's really the number I'm looking for here.
254.
I'm just going to say,
Over to Nerdbomber.
you said 254?
Yeah.
I feel like,
She doesn't like that. She doesn't like that answer.
no, I don't. 50.
Tactic on the board again. 3,821. Most are colored bananas. There's 3,500 colored bananas. If you guys played this game, it's enormous. It's an amazing game. But yeah, 3,821. So off by an order of magnitude, but nevertheless, Tactic gets the point. And right away, he's got Nerdbomber on the ropes, and he's got his +1. So things are looking not great for Nerdbomber. Going into the third question, how much was Seth Rogen paid to voice Donkey Kong in the recent smash hit film Super Mario Brothers? I guess it's technically called the Super Mario Brothers movie, but you understand the question. How much was Seth Rogen paid to do the Donkey Kong stuff?
He got a cool 10 mil.
And one.
Boy, she strategied Techtic into wasting his +1. You guys both busted. It was only $200,000. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a voice.
It wasn't a waste.
I don't think it was. It wasn't a waste. I mean, she's still not on the board, and there's 2 questions to go. So the most she can do is tie you and force a tiebreaker. But we'll see what happens in these last 2 questions. Donkey Kong's TV show, because that's right, there was a TV show. Donkey Kong Country, based on the SNES classic, aired in France and the United States in 1997 and 98, respectively. How many episodes of this show aired?
37. No. 42. Yes.
And Nerdbomber.
43.
Oof. You both busted.
Seriously?
Tactic, you were very close with 37. It was 40 episodes, so you barely busted. This cements the win for Tactic. We will do the last question to see if Nerdbomber can get a pity point. But Tactic pulls this one out. How many copies did the original Donkey Kong Country sell worldwide? And I'll give you the hint. It was the 3rd best-selling Super Nintendo game ever. How many copies did the original Donkey Kong Country sell worldwide?
500,000.
Over to Techtic to go for the sweep.
11.
9.3 million. So Nerdbomber did get on the board.
I don't know why I assumed that like back then there just weren't that many copies distributed.
I mean, 3rd best-selling ever feels like a big, like a lot of games were sold. Certainly more than 11.
I was
you're
just trying to
do
give her
but-
give her the nice point.
Well, Tactic moves to 5 and 9. Nerdbomber moves to 7 and 5, and I remain at 7 and 4, which means by virtue of percentages, your boy just took the lead without really doing anything. And that's the American dream right there. Thank you all for joining us here on the Online Warriors podcast for this week's episode. You can head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review if you liked what you listened to, or if you didn't. You can also hit us up on Twitter /X, handles mentioned previously in the episode. And head over to Patreon, patreon.com/Online Warriors podcast. Check us out over there. And, tell your friends, tell your wife, tell your husband, tell your girlfriend, boyfriend, your grandma, your dog. The last one isn't very important, but you still could if you wanted to.
Excuse me.
I mean, dogs can't listen to podcasts functionally. Like, it's not.
Yes, they absolutely can.
Well, that listenership isn't independently tracked. It's not useful to us as a metric. That's kind of what I'm saying. we'll see you guys next week. Stay safe and keep on podcasting.